Join Zweig Group in Tampa Bay, Florida on September 18th and 19th for the 2024 Elevate AEC Conference and Awards Gala. Immerse yourself in a dynamic environment of innovation and collaboration with industry visionaries like Chad Kleinens, Linda Darr, and Kit Miyamoto. Enjoy thought-provoking keynotes, engaging breakout sessions, and unparalleled networking opportunities. Come, celebrate excellence at our iconic Black Tie Awards Gala and gain insights to propel your firm forward. Don't miss out. Register now at zweiggroup.com. We'll see you in Tampa this fall.
Hey everyone, it's Randy Wilburn with the Zweig Letter Podcast. Today we're excited to bring you an encore of one of our most popular episodes. Join us as we revisit my conversation with Scott Harvey-Lewis, a structural engineer out of Florida who talks about the move from being an intrapreneur to being an entrepreneur. This episode is packed with insights on intrapreneurship within the design industry and is a great conversation. Let's jump right in and enjoy this fan favorite once again.
Welcome to the Zweig Letter Podcast, putting architectural, engineering, planning, and environmental consulting advice and guidance in your ear. Zweig Group's team of experts have spent more than 3 decades elevating the industry by helping AEP and environmental consulting firms thrive. And these podcasts deliver invaluable management, industry, client, marketing, and HR advice directly to you, free of charge. The Zweig Letter Podcasts, elevating the design industry one episode at a time.
Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of the Zweig Letter Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn, and I'm excited to be with you today. I've got a great guest, and I was racking my brain trying to go back in the annals of the Zweig Letter Podcast, all 208 plus episodes, to see where this person fell on that podcast. Because I thought for some reason I was like, oh, they've already been a guest on this podcast because they're so dynamic and they're doing so many great things. And then I realized I actually had them on another podcast that I run called the Encourage, Build, Grow podcast. So folks, I can't keep up. After 1,000 plus podcast episodes, you lose track of things, but I have not lost track of this individual and the energy that they bring to the design industry. And that individual, our guest today, is Scott Harvey-Lewis. Scott is the owner and president at Building Mavens, and he's down in Southern Florida. He's just a really great guy. We kind of connected on LinkedIn just because I saw his post, and I said there's something about him, and that was about a year and a half ago, maybe even longer. And we've been virtual friends. We haven't met in person, but we have been virtual friends ever since. And so when I saw him make a move and start his own business, his own design firm, I said, wait a minute, stop the presses. We got to talk about this, and I got to go find out what happened. And so without further ado, I want to welcome Scott Harvey-Lewis to the Zweig Letter Podcast. Scott, how are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me again. And I think since you said it was the other podcast and not this one, then I'm glad to meet everybody on this podcast. And I'm looking forward to discussion because the last one we had was lively, it was insightful, and I think this will be pretty beneficial to everybody. So for all the listeners, I'm Scott Lewis. I'm a licensed engineer. As Randy said, I decided to branch off on my own and start a firm and do what I specialize in, which is assessments and building teams and growing business. And it's been a few months so far, and so far it's going well.
That's awesome. Was there any one thing? I mean, the pandemic for a lot of people caused them to do what I call the pandemic pivot, right? Where they had to rethink how they were doing things and whether they wanted to continue doing things the old way that they were doing them pre-pandemic, or was the pandemic an opportunity for them to move into something new? And I'd be curious to know, what was it for you that precipitated your decision to definitely step out on your own, which is what we talked about before the recording, that a lot of design people that work in the design industry dream of being their own boss, dream of being a principal, dream of being that individual that controls the purse strings and handles everything from start to finish. Where do you fall in that?
It's interesting because I don't think it was maybe one thing in particular, but maybe just a culmination of a few little things. Mm-hmm. And I'll talk professionally and then just maybe personally and just...
Sure.
So one thing that stuck out to me last year is I was listening to Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Somebody told, a lot of people were saying, hey, listen to this book or read the book. And one thing that stuck out to me that they said in that book was about taxation and how most people think that their largest bill is maybe their mortgage or something like that. Maybe people have huge bills they pay for school and so on. But the guy who wrote the book was saying that it's taxes. And the way that people essentially minimize taxes is through corporations. And so whether I was going to go on my own or not, I was like, well, maybe I need to form a corporation because, again, the more money you make, the more you get taxed. And at some point, it just becomes ridiculous. And you, if you're middle class and at a certain bracket, you become the poster child for like taxation. And so I think I was reaching that point. And so I decided to just create a company. At the time, I didn't know what I was going to call it, but to create a company that if I wanted to set up a tax efficient vehicle, that was going to be one thing. So that was just in the grand scheme of my life. Professionally, in doing things in the past companies, growing teams, building business, I had essentially formed companies within companies. And the first one I didn't really recognize whether it was me or the situation. But in doing it a couple times, I was like, okay, I really do have a certain skill set for that side of the world. And I never really thought, okay, maybe I could do it as myself, as an entity, as an owner. But I essentially was enrolled in classes to do with different CEOs. And as they were talking through me and looking at profiles and my strengths, they kept pushing me towards, why don't you just do it for yourself? You know, why do it for someone else if you can do it? And it's true. In the grand scheme of things, when you're at a certain level, the companies that you want to join, they say to you, well, how much can you bring me? Right? So if they're going to pay you X, they may want a return of 3X, 4X on you. So if you're able to do it, you'll have to bring in essentially a lot more to justify your salary and your compensation with a certain entity. So it really is remarkable when you think about it, that for the comfort of a salary, someone is willing to go 4X to make what they probably could make by themselves. So that was probably the career side. So just life was, oh, wait, this is a new concept about taxation and how to be more tax efficient. Then there was, okay, where am I in the stream of time, what I've done so far, and then coaches and mentors saying one thing. And then lastly, with the pandemic and the way everybody's gone remote and gone to the cloud and how servers run differently and people just envision work as a different flow, I think it all came together nicely that my experience, expertise, timing just came naturally that maybe it's worth the shot of putting it on myself. And so I just decided to make the leap.
So what you're saying is that through all of that, I'm hearing you say that we have Robert Kiyosaki to thank for your decision to step out in faith and start your own thing.
Well, as partly, interestingly, so there's key things. So that was one, like, it just won't come out to my mind right now, that through corporations, there's a lot of tax efficient ways that you can essentially live the same, but not be taxed as much, right? And so that's one. So then a couple of mentors had said to me when I was talking about different opportunities and what was on the table, and I was saying, hey, as coming from the islands and being taught, you want to work hard and not be too risky if you have a family. In talking to some of these CEOs that have their own businesses, they're like, it's more risky working for somebody else than working for yourself. Yeah. It may not be as stable or as certain as getting a paycheck every week, but it definitely is more safe to be your own boss because, you essentially are in charge. But the harder thing is just the uncertainty of what's next, right? And so if you're okay with that, then, and if you're confident in what you can do, then it should be okay.
Yeah. And it's funny because from one small business owner to another, I feel that way. And I know exactly what you're talking about. And that is something that is, for me, that is something that actually, that gets me out of bed every morning, right? What it will be, right? What could be as opposed to what was. And so, And again, this is no knock on a W-2 employee or anything like that. There's just something about the fact that I really do control how much money I make. So whether I go out and work super hard or whether I go out and kind of just meander along, ultimately at the end of the day, I can control the income that is afforded me. And I just think that there's something very, very powerful about that.
Yeah, it's definitely a different way to think. And unless you experience it, I don't think anybody can really tell you the feeling. And I joke sometimes because I now can understand why some people might just up and change their life completely and just say, you know what, I'm taking a pause professionally, like people are saying right now, and I'm just going to travel to Italy and maybe set up shop there for a couple months just to feel the mental clarity and ease of that situation. Not saying that being a business owner or running your own show is easy, but I think it is a nice feeling to, like you said, wake up in the morning and have the full control of yourself and your day. And if you have to make decisions, then, I mean, not saying you're going to make every right decision, but you can essentially move quickly and reap the reward. Or if it's a risky decision and it doesn't go well, then you learn from that mistake and move forward.
Yeah. And, it's funny because something you just mentioned earlier before I made my statement was simply just the fact that you were building companies within companies. Do you think that it seems like the design industry is fertile ground for intrapreneurs, right? There's a difference between an entrepreneur and an intrapreneur. An intrapreneur is typically an individual that works within the confines of a larger organization, but they're given the freedom and the flexibility to kind of manage and control things, which I know you were given that. And so you had that freedom and flexibility. You almost had your cake and ate it too, right? From that perspective. But what did you think of being an intrapreneur versus what you're currently doing right now?
That's a good question. If I look at just the everyday, again, if you're within an organization, and at the end of the day, you have to report to somebody, right? And
sure,
you may be reporting to individuals that either you have the same like mindset, and that may go well. If you're thinking differently, then there may be friction, and that may lead to, even though you may be doing well, the friction of personalities may end up with you not being happy. Yeah. And there isn't a price to put on just being happy in what you do, right? So some people have left really well-paying jobs to make fractions of what they made, but they're a lot happier. And so I think that's part of what I was facing, is that maybe partly, I mean, obviously there's 2 personalities or 3 or 4, whatever it is. And when you reach a certain point, the friction of just maybe egos rubbing together all the time and trying to work through different issues wears on people. I mean, it wore on me a lot. And I felt like I just needed a break of rubbing against other people's wishes, because I was never a majority owner, or owner in the sense that I made controlling decisions. So if whether I was right or wrong, I still could be trumped at any time. And I think that's maybe the difference between intrapreneur and entrepreneur is, where I am right now, I can't be trumped. And before I could be. However, I may have more risk because I may not have the full gamut of knowledge. And so, I have a circle of mentors and so on that I can lean on and talk to. But at the end of the day, if I make a decision, then I have full risk and responsibility for it, which I think that comes with the step or leap of faith, so to speak.
Yeah. So, and I'm curious to know this, and we didn't really talk about this beforehand, but, we're going to let this roll. But did you feel like when you made your transition from working for somebody else to doing your own thing, that you didn't burn all the boats, right? You didn't, you didn't burn your bridges or anything like that as far as making your transition over to doing your own thing? And if so, what was that like? How did your conversation go with, your former employer? Were you encouraged, or what were you expecting when you, made the decision that you were going to make this move?
So I wasn't 100% sure what I was going to do, but I spoke to my boss at my last firm and was very candid that I was just at a point where professionally and personally, I just wanted a mental break. And I had some opportunities that were available that I could either go back to be the intrapreneur, or I had this shell that I had created back to that book, right? That was on the table, and everybody I talked to said, well, if you're going to go to another firm, and that may be a good thing to put into the mix too. So as I was interviewing for different opportunities, again, the same conversation just kept coming up. It was, all right, we need somebody to build a region, form an office, and okay, whatever you want, we want 3 to 4x, right? And so everywhere I went, it wasn't, hey, we have this wonderful garden for you to go in and just make yours. It was like, how are you going to build for us? And then once you do that, we will come to bat for you. And so I just kept thinking to myself, well, if I'm going to have to build 4x for somebody else, I think I can build 1x for myself.
Right.
And so I had the shell, and I was like, do I do 1x or 1.5x, or do I try to go 4x for stability? And I just said, you know what, I want to, and then somebody asked me like, well, whatever you do, would you look back and regret not taking this time and doing it yourself? And I said, yeah, I probably would have that regret. And they said, well, they regretted never doing that because I guess they were a perpetual intrapreneur where they always built other businesses for other people. And they, looking back in their career, they said that they really wished at that point where they were like I was, that they had just bet on themselves. And so a lot of people were just encouraging me to do it that way. And I just said, you know what, maybe I have enough that I could run half a year to a year just doing it. And so I decided let's try it this way.
Yeah. And especially for those that I mean, of course, hopefully some of your friends will listen to this episode, but for those that don't know you, would you be kind enough to share with the audience the area of engineering that you focus on? Because you got your bachelor's in civil engineering from the Florida Institute of Technology. You went to University of Florida and got your master's. And I know you've done structural work. And is there any other area that you focused on besides structures?
So I started off doing structural design, and then halfway through transitioned to restoration and inspections and litigation support, working on, let's say, the forensic world of things. And so through that avenue, because buildings rarely ever collapse and have the major structural issues, especially in Florida, besides what happened last year at Surfside, which we can talk about how that kind of was a catalyst as well. But what I've had to pick up is more building envelope, waterproofing, roofing, that type of specialty, because when we're looking at buildings, that's really what I would focus on as opposed to electrical and plumbing systems and so forth. So that's a new skill that I picked up a few years ago. But at heart, my training is structural engineering. And just to kind of segue with what happened with Surfside, because of that massive collapse and the death and the tragedy that ensued from that, there are new mandates and bills that were passed in Florida that now require buildings of a certain age and certain proximity to now do inspections at certain intervals. And so that's kind of the realm of what I would do. And so in forming the business, it was like, wait, there's no mandated inspections that fall into my wheelhouse. So there should be a steady flow of work because buildings have to do this. And it's my specialty. And in the stream of time with remote work and clouds and so forth, it just seemed everything to line up. And I didn't really answer your question about was I encouraged. So my previous employer really wanted me to start a business as well. They said, hey, Scott, you've reached a point where you could do this. And so I don't think I burned any bridges there because I didn't take any clients from them. It was separate specialties, but I wasn't 100% sure what I was going to do when I left. I just knew I needed somewhat of a break to kind of refocus and focus on my family at the time, because we had experienced a death as well, just like you in the summertime. And so it was just a period where I wanted to really focus on that and kind of recenter myself before I moved forward.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and I mean, I think the, you stepping out like that, you never know what the outcome will be, but you know, like I always say, and I use this analogy, you know, I always tell people, hey, if you're going to get out of the boat, don't look down, just look straight ahead and keep walking. Right. Because the reality is that the minute that you look down that's when you start taking on water and everything else. So, you know, I mean, a lot of times we need to just get out of the boat and, you know, we've either heard from somebody or we've gotten a confirmation or our skill set is such that everybody has said, man, how come you don't run your own shop? And I'm not encouraging anybody to quit their job tomorrow. That's not what I'm saying. But if you keep hearing that nagging voice in your head that keeps saying over the years, hey, you should go start your own job or go start your own company. which kind of is like a job, right? Because I feel like sometimes I do own a job. I have a business, but it's a very, very lucrative job. And that really more so gets into the processes of how you run your business and, whether or not you feel like you have to do everything yourself. And that's like a whole nother topic. But the bottom line is that you do have to, be willing to kind of step out in faith and try something different and hope for the best, right? And certainly build relationships that stand the test of time. Even just me doing this podcast right here with the Zweig Letter podcast, I don't work with Zweig Group anymore as an employee, but I am a consultant to them and we have a strong relationship. And I've had a relationship with this company for more than 20 plus years, because I've never really burned any bridges and I've always looked for ways to add value in anything that I was doing. And this is my way of adding value back to them, even though I'm not a technical employee of Zweig Group. And so that, you just have to work that out. And people recognize that. And they know if you bring a value to the table, people don't want to lose that value in that relationship. Yeah. So my encouragement is just, make sure you have those conversations like what you had. You had a transparent and open conversation with your previous employer that clearly worked out for you. And so I think it's just something that people should consider. If they're doing it, there are a number of steps that should be taken before you step out of that boat. And again, not once you do commit to stepping out of the boat, don't look down, just look straight ahead and decide what are you going to conquer first? And then just go after it with, as I like to say, reckless abandon, right? Because you have nothing to lose. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, it's definitely not easy. I don't think, it's funny, like some of these, I guess the right word is influencers, they go on and post and they're like, hey, I did this, or like, just do this. And maybe it did work for them and it's a glamorous life, but I've never worked harder than I've worked in these, let's say past few months. And like you said, it's for myself, so it's a little different feeling. But to make things happen, you can't just wake up and think it's just going to fall from the sky, right? It's constant. I call it like relentlessness. Like if you need a job today or a lead, it's like you turn over every stone until the lead pops up. But it's never going to be right in front of you as you wake up. And maybe the seeds you plant. It was so funny. Like the other day, a proposal I just came in and it was signed and I was like, I forgot. And I was like, whoa, this was one I did like a few months ago. And I was like, wow, I didn't even expect this one to hit today. I actually thought it was just gone, and you never know, right? So it's just continuous pushing. It's a lot of effort. I don't think it's for everybody, but it's good to have said for me to know what it really takes. Right. And I think that's also part of the journey. When I was talking to my wife about it, she was like, well, maybe if you do this as well, then it builds more credibility for yourself, right? Because somebody can always say, well, you did it because you were part of this company. But if you do it when you're your own entity, then I don't think anybody can really take that away. So in doing this, I'm showing myself that I am capable of winning work, managing work, running a business. It's going from start to finish, from inception through payment, managing clients. And so it's nice to see the whole thing happening because of, like you said, a decision just to do it on my own. And there was nothing there before, and now there's things. So it's nice to see that just from the outside looking in. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, there's one thing you just mentioned a second ago, and I know this was what really impressed me about you was that, you were, I know you're out there grinding on a regular basis and working hard, but you were also like a prolific poster on LinkedIn. You had some really great, like, not just like benign stuff. Thought-provoking posts. And I was just, I was always enamored by that more than anything else. The one thing I will have to mention though, Scott, is that I've noticed that those posts have greatly decreased in the past several months because your focus is different. How has that been reconciling? You had the freedom before to post a lot of stuff that was just really great. And I encourage anybody to follow Scott Harvey-Lewis on LinkedIn. And I'll make sure that his LinkedIn information is on the show notes because he's definitely somebody, he's a thought leader. He is a change agent within the design industry and somebody that you should be following. But I'm curious to know how that changed for you. Because you were like on and popping for a while. And then all of a sudden it was crickets. Well, so at the turn of the year, going back to, I think, what is something worth, right? And So I was posting, but when I'm with other companies, it's really pulling a lot of attention to them, right? And so like, if I have a large following and I'm posting, but the benefit is going to the company, and I'm not really, I mean, all this, I was not being paid for any of this. It was just something I was doing at the time to really bring attention to the company itself and to help me build the groups. But I think as it grew and grew, the right appreciation wasn't there, right? And so, I just decided to stop posting while I figure out what I was doing. And in that way, when I did decide to post again, it would be for me and for the business. So when I started posting recently, I wanted to make sure, let's say the website was done, that there was content coming and that things were in place as opposed to just random posts here and there. And then also, like I said, a few months ago, we had some death in the family. So it was just like, let me just take some time and recenter, refocus. And then once I'm ready again, I'll jump back on. Because it is a lot of work. I mean, somebody may say, well, to create a post takes a few minutes, but to really do it right, it takes a lot of thought. And then you don't want to stop because you want to keep a steady flow of momentum. If you post once for a month or once every 2 months, it's not going to do much. So you really have to have a concentrated effort that you're going to keep this up. So I didn't want to start back without being ready to do it. But that's a whole nother job in itself.
Oh, it is. It really is. People don't recognize it. And I was always amazed. I was like, man, I was always impressed with your LinkedIn and your social media game because you were always on point with your messages, very thought-provoking, very insightful, really in tune with some of the challenges that design professionals are facing on a regular basis. And then you interlaced it with a lot of just common sense advice and guidance. So, definitely in one day in the near future, we look forward to hearing back from Scott Harvey-Lewis with your insightful, witty banter and just observations about life and about being a design professional. So I have a question for you that I wanted to ask you. And, we've talked about diversity in the design industry on a regular basis. And I'd be curious to know what are your thoughts around that, right? And simply just from the simple effect of, how has diversity played a role for you as a design professional with the understanding that it's going to be different for different people, different experiences. But I'm just curious to know, we are 2 years out from George Floyd. I know when that happened, I did a number of episodes on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I have purposefully I've worked hard to bring a wide variety of voices to this podcast, right? So it's just not, a bunch of old white guys talking about the industry, right? Because that's fine too. But the bottom line is that this industry is made up of a lot of different pieces, a lot of different people, a lot of different voices. But I would be curious to know what your thoughts have been around this industry as we continue to expand and try to grow.
When I think about that, it's hard for me to answer that. And the reason why is because coming from a different country where it's not as prevalent. Yeah. Like I grew up in classes with all different races. It was a co-ed school.
And you're from Jamaica, right?
From Jamaica, right? So Jamaica, the biggest
out of many one.
Yeah. So the biggest thing in classes or in society was just class distinctions, maybe, right? Rich, poor, middle class. But there was no, like you could have females that were very high up in government. Even had the prime minister of the country was a female at one point. Doesn't matter if you're black, white. So I've never really grown up and haven't seen color or have those implicit biases. So to answer your question is like, I don't really know how that's affected my career. Has it? It could have, right? Because I really am oblivious sometimes to whether it be microaggressions or someone being biased against you. Sometimes some things happen, I have to scratch my head, but I don't know how much it has affected me. I know it affects people in general. And like with all these different things that come up throughout, whether police brutality or anything that comes out in society right now, you see that there are deep-rooted issues. And so you just never know, right? You can never know if somebody is like that or is treating you a certain way because of that. I don't know how much it has affected my career, if that's a good answer. I do know that sometimes.
Yeah, no. And that's fine. I mean, that's fine.
Yeah, but I know for sure sometimes, like I said, in passing, it's definitely not a diverse industry we're in, right? If I go into certain meetings, sometimes I might be the only person of color. I might be the only minority there. And so it's not well represented. And if you look at statistics for female engineers or, female minority engineers, it's very, very, very low. And when you look at just the statistics in companies of pay scales, there's a lot that needs to be corrected. But even when they correct it, that doesn't really correct the internals of a person, right? That's just numbers.
Sure.
So I think there's a lot, no matter how much you do on paper, there's probably 10x the work that would have to be done to people. And that, who knows how long that would take and how deep that goes. That's a very, very hard thing to tackle.
It may not be. I was having this conversation with somebody earlier today. It may not be in my generation. It may not be in my kids' generation. I just have a feeling that at some point in time, we're going to get to that Star Trek generation where you could have like an arm coming out of your head and people are just going to take you for who you are. And it's just not going to be an issue, right? It's like, that's the man with the arm out of his head. It's no big deal. So, it's just one day we're going to get there. And that utopian society that I think we're all endeavoring for. So, but in the meantime, we just got to continue to take little steps and try to make the world a better place each and every day, which is something that certainly you're doing, and you've kind of stepped out. Now, have you hired anybody to work with you, or you?
Yeah, I have a few people working with me right now. Some are contract basis, some are full time.
Sure.
Also relying on 1099 work. So I'm trying to put it together as efficiently as possible without taking on too much risk unnecessarily. And also what I found too in just doing work, you can be a lot more efficient with less force if everybody knows what they're doing, right? So, numbers don't necessarily mean more capability or more expertise, because sometimes that leads to inefficiencies and redo. So part of creating what I'm doing is trying to put best practices in place and then giving people the freedom to work in a way that gets rid of all that cumbersome stuff.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I totally understand where you're coming from. And certainly, each day for you is probably something new to deal with and to encounter. So you're in the middle of writing the story, right? You've lived it with other companies. Now you're doing it for yourself. And each day is kind of a new opportunity and a new obstacle, both in the same breath.
Yeah, so it's been great so far in just the experience, but it definitely, like I said, it's a grind, and you got to be relentless, because there's certain days when you wake up and you're like, what am I doing?
Absolutely.
And as you just go past that, then you just keep doing, just keep going.
You got to keep going. That's right. Keep swimming. So if people want to reach out to you, Scott, what's the best way for them to connect with you? Might be some folks down in Florida that are listening to this and are like, man, we need to connect with this guy and see how he might be able to help us. Or even if they just want to reach out and chat with you because they're even possibly thinking about stepping out on their own to start something. What's the best way for people to reach you?
I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So if somebody searches me, they can get me, right? My email is easy. It's just scott@buildingmavens.com. If it's for business or work related, then they can message info@buildingmavens.com. And that's where most clients go to get proposals and quotes for different services. But I think if the easiest way is if somebody searches me, I might pop up on LinkedIn and just shoot me a message. I'm pretty responsive that way.
Yeah, Scott is very responsive that way because that's how I originally connected with him. So I can vouch for him, and certainly he's an outstanding and just a highly regarded individual in our industry. So Scott Harvey-Lewis, thank you so much for coming on and talking about Building Mavens, your new company, and just for all the things that you're doing. And we wish you nothing but continued success and growth as you move this new venture forward. And I do look forward to connecting with you in person, in IRL, as the cool kids say, the next time that I'm down in Southern Florida. So maybe we can break bread or something like that. But thank you so much for coming on the Zweig Letter podcast. We really, really appreciate it.
Yes, thanks for having me. And I look forward to meeting in person. I think we connected over COVID, so we're now on the back end.
Yeah, it's all good. It's time, right? Coming. It's coming. Yeah, it's coming soon enough. So, but thank you again for coming on the podcast. Well, folks, that's another episode of the Zweig Letter Podcast. To learn more about one of the oldest newsletters in the design industry, visit zweiggroup.com. You can read articles online, listen to this podcast, and sign up for a free subscription to the newsletter and have it delivered right into your email inbox every Monday morning. Sign up today. For more information about Zweig Group's advisory services or any of Zweig Group's publications, visit zweiggroup.com. You can subscribe to this Zweig Letter podcast wherever you listen to it, and please consider rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn, and we'll see you with another new episode soon. Peace.
Thanks for tuning in to the Zweig Letter podcast. We hope that you can be part of elevating the industry and that you can apply our advice and information to your daily professional life. For a free digital subscription to the Zweig Letter, please visit thezweigletter.com/subscribe to gain more wisdom and inspiration, in addition to information about leadership, finance, HR, and marketing your firm. Subscribe today.